Welcome to the Critical Minerals session at Hello Tomorrow. I hope you had a good morning so far. So we're going to talk about how to bridge the supply gap in the critical mineral space. Why? Because in order to meet our climate goals, the world is going to have to deploy an incredible amount of machines to electrify the energy system, from deploying expanding the power grid to electric vehicles to batteries and so on. So we're going to have to use a lot more copper, lithium, nickel, graphite, and so on. And even though the world has more than enough resource in the subsurface, there's a big gap between the pipeline of the supply of these minerals and how much the world is going to need of these minerals. And so we're going to look at what are the specific challenges for some of these minerals and what are some of the technical innovations and the broader geopolitical context in which this takes place. And I feel really lucky to have three amazing speakers to look into this together with me. So Julia Devory, co-founder and general partner at Convergent Ventures. Lilian Schwisch, co-founder and CEO of Scilib, a battery recycling company. And Eric Dusseux, venture partner at Breakthrough Energy Ventures. So first, I would love each of you to maybe share a bit more about your background. And in particular, I'd love to learn more about your journey so far into the world of critical minerals. Maybe, Julia, we can start with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm Julia Devory, general partner of Convergent Ventures. At Convergent, we invest at the convergence of science, data, and people in two big verticals, health and sustainability, or as we like to call it, people and planet health. And we back exceptional founders commercializing scientific innovations in these verticals at the seed and early Series A level. And so how I came into this, well, I'm an engineer, energy and environmental engineer by background. I started my career in Canada, which is a pretty big mining country for some minerals, and started working for an engineering consulting company called Hatch, where we worked a lot with the mining industry. So, for example, my former colleagues and I, we did the first life cycle assessment for the metal manganese, which is used primarily, which is an important component in steel. And so as part of that, I visited about 10% of all of the manganese mines and smelters across the world. And then we did very similar studies at a smaller scale, at the site scale, to help mining sites reduce their energy and greenhouse gas emissions. We also worked to bring technologies into the mine, or did things like calculating the carbon sequestration potential of the land that are owned by miners, things like that. So eventually I became a venture capital investor, and to bring it back to the beginning, I've been very bullish about mining technologies as an investment thesis over the past couple of years.
Cool. So you're actually one of the very few VCs who actually has hands-on experience in metallurgy and mineral extraction, which is like really...
Boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground, exactly. Great. Lilian.
Yes, so glad to be here. My background is a metallurgical engineer, and actually I've learned a lot about how metals are refined coming from ores. I've learned how we can recycle byproducts of like primary metallurgical streams, and specialized basically on anthropogenic resources like urban mining. How can we recycle electronic scrap? How can we recycle batteries? And what I've seen over my studies is that there are big flaws. And so when I applied for my PhD, I pitched to my professor saying, I want to rethink battery recycling so that it's also resource efficient and especially working for EV batteries. Because at that time, it was all about consumer batteries. And so with EV batteries, there are new challenges arising. And so, yeah, I've spent like many, many years in the lab researching on cool technologies to recycle batteries better. And basically did also metallurgical consulting for companies who were interested in this new emerging market of batteries. You know, they wanted to know, could it be a business case for them? Or for the OEMs, for example, they were curious on really how to navigate with all the scrap arising, which they put onto the market, right? And therefore, I've learned that there are big companies which are well capitalized, but not really experienced with those innovative and also resource-efficient technologies. Yeah. And so that's why my co-founder and me, standing in the lab, decided to make a business out of the technologies we had researched. And yeah, that's basically why I'm here today.
Amazing, congrats. Thanks, Liliane. Eric?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Eric Dusseux. So I'm a venture partner with Breakthrough Energy Ventures. I have a scientific background, and I was an entrepreneur and a C-suite executive also. Breakthrough Energy Ventures, as you know, is a fund dedicated to clean tech industry to fight, in fact, the climate change and support innovation. And critical mineral is really at the core of one of our investment theses. And we tackle the quantity issue and the quality issue. So the quantity issue is around how can we find new sources of critical minerals. That's number one. How to extract more with less. How can we replace critical minerals and the substitutability of those ones? How can we better recycle and upcycle? And that's something you're very fond of. And how can we reduce demand in a deliberate and structured way? So that's for the quantity issues. Those 5 levers are being explored, and we are working on it actively with some companies already in the panel. In our portfolio, we have more than 100 companies in our portfolio, and some of them are currently completely dedicated to mineral. The role innovation we can play also is addressing as I said, the quality issue. And about quality, it's how can we extract and process in a less environmental impactful way. As you know, mining industry is directly responsible for 4 to 7% of the GHG emission on Earth, so that matters a lot. So how can we reduce the emissions from the mining, processing, and recycling? So these are basically all the levers that we're tackling within Breakthrough Energy Ventures.
Cool. Thank you, Eric. So maybe I'd like to kickstart things with copper. So copper is probably like the backbone of the energy transition. It's everywhere in power grids, in any device that is electrified, in the connection to renewables, in electric vehicles, in batteries, and so on. And it's one of the metals where there's already like a big baseline. It's about 25 million tons of copper that is being extracted every year, and we need to double that amount by 2050. It doesn't sound a lot, but because the baseline is so huge, it's going to be a massive issue. And because the copper really exemplifies some of the challenge, like mines take a lot of time to open. It takes like sometimes 15 years to open a new mine. The quality of the ores are a bit decreasing and so on. So there's a lot of challenges. I'd love maybe to get your take, maybe Julia to start on, like, how do you see the structure of the market and the geopolitical context in copper in particular, and what makes it like particularly challenging and difficult to increase to bridge the supply gap in copper?
Yeah, so copper, I think many of you know that, is mostly mined in Chile, and there's a lot in South America. However, a lot of the refining is done in China. So that gives you an example of I guess like one of the very particular things in mining is that you don't pick where the resources are, and you just have to go to every location and then try to supply. You know, each region is trying to supply for their own uses. So in the case of copper, there's a lot that's being done in the Andes Mountains, which is already a really tough environment to be in. It's very high altitude, it's very dry, you have to get water. A lot of water is coming from desalination, so there's a lot of technical challenges to open up new mines there. I guess another point is that copper has been mined for literally millennia, right? We had a copper age, then we had a bronze age when we figured out that copper and tin made a good match. And so everything that's been easy to find has been found, and now we gotta not necessarily literally dig deeper, but sometimes dig deeper into the earth. And it's difficult to find new deposits that are economically feasible. So I guess a few decades ago, it was fairly easy to find copper deposits that were like 5% copper into the ground, sometimes up to 10%, but now you'd be hard pressed to find anything that's a percent.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of mass to be moving around.
Yeah,
Maybe
well,
I'll stop there so you guys can comment.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe my angle on copper from a very practical point of view. So I think, like for mining copper, you cannot just switch on and off on demand. So you have to plan in advance, right? So getting the permission for a mine takes like around 7 years around. And so our contribution to like keep copper in the loop is to recycle it better. And what we've seen over the last years is, yeah, you can recycle copper quite nicely in pyrometallurgical processes. That's kind of working, but is it like really the most environmentally friendly and most reasonable way? Maybe not. And so what we are doing is we are going the extra mile to separate copper from aluminum, which is in batteries in a very thin foil, like in basically each and every battery, you find those copper foils. And so it's a very interesting resource where you can do urban mining. However, in current practice, the sorting was done very poorly. And so that aluminum and copper foils were just, collected together and molten down together. This means no aluminum recycling anymore. And this means also for copper, a bit of extra work to get it back to the high purities you want to have. And so we developed a technology to extract copper by like sorting technologies and like mechanical preparation and process technology, so that we have a pure copper product, which is like 97.5%. And this is something which is super cool to reintegrate into the value chain.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting to point out the recycling, because copper is also one of these metals where you already have a lot of copper stock today in the economy. And so the secondary resource for copper is really massive. And the more we can use that to reduce the pressure on primary supply, I think the better. Eric, we'd love to get your take on the copper.
So you're right. We need a lot of copper, and our way to net zero will, as you said, and you portrayed very well, Julia, will demand a lot of copper. That's why, in fact, we invested in one company, and in fact, several companies, but one that I am in mind, which is Cobalt Metals. They're using AI and machine learning, in fact, to, number one, better survey and then drill. There's a lot to do, and many data, as you say, from the 10% that we had centuries ago, and now the close to 1%, 2% that we can find. Data aggregation is key, data modeling is key, and that's, they're developing a software that is, in fact, extremely valuable for mining. And then they're not only stopping at that stage, it's not only a software that they're producing, they're also doing investments, strategic investments, and they're on land claims that they will then sell to operators. So covering those, all these value chain steps are key, in fact, to discover better, faster, and in a cheaper way. Copper, but not only copper, of course, but copper is a large chunk of it. They claim having done more than 60 investments raised on the land claims. Yeah,
that's really, really cool.
I think it's a great example that in copper you really have to work on both exploration and then extraction. Exploration, like we've just been describing, because it's harder to find the metal. A lot of it is already outside of the ground. But then on extraction, there's some very deep environmental issues with it today. So about 30% of it can go into heap leaching. So it's a hydrometallurgy process where you use chemicals to get the copper out through, like with a solvent. And then the other 70% of copper, mostly, you have to put in a smelter at really high heat and really, just a lot of energy. And so we're finding some companies that are also trying to find completely different alternatives to hydrometallurgy and pyrometallurgy, which is very well understood, and going to very novel technologies that can span from electrochemical reactors to completely new solvents. There's a company here, Decycle, that use eutectic solvents. There's also new technologies that go at it with biology, getting the power of enzymes and bacteria to try and get the metal out. So it's quite exciting.
Right. And this focus on getting the metal out from like the copper sulfides ore, right, where it's more difficult to get the copper compared to the copper oxides that are on the surface. Yeah. Okay, super interesting. Another resource we haven't talked about is like the mine tailings and mining waste. I don't know whether you've seen like interesting like technical innovations as well to get the copper out from this kind of resource. But that's another kind of resource we were looking at as well. Super interesting. I'd like to switch maybe now to battery minerals. So battery minerals in particular, we have so at least like 3 very different minerals. So lithium, nickel, and graphite to take 3. And it's interesting because nickel, for instance, there's already like, maybe not as much as copper, but there's already like a lot of existing mining activity, a lot of it not for energy-related use case, but the increase in demand for electrification is going to increase massively. Lithium, the baseline is actually very small. I think it's like 100,000 tons or something like that of lithium, which is being extracted every year through different types of processes. But it needs to increase like by 7x by 2030, which has a gap of about 30% on the planned supply pipeline and the demand. And graphite, which is not a metal but a mineral, has a similar kind of gap and is in the battery electrodes. So I don't know, Julia, Eric, who wants to pick up maybe the market for one of these? Pick your mineral of choice and maybe go into the market.
Yeah, either way. All right, let's see. So lithium, comparing it to copper, we really haven't been mining it for very long. So in the case of lithium, we don't necessarily have any reserves issues. We know that it is in the ground in really large quantities, yet we need to increase the rate at which we extract it. And like you said, it's 7x for lithium itself. Like Li is a metal. If you look at lithium carbonates,
even more, yeah.
It's far more. Yeah, it's probably 25x. So it's also a metal that we are just starting, within the past decade or so to recycle. So we can, I think, by 2050, we should be able to recycle about 60% of it or so.
And really on the primary resource of lithium, it would be interesting to double click on like the types of resource, because I think a lot of people have in mind the big salars that we see in South America, but there's also other kind of lithium resource. I don't know whether we want to...
Yeah, I mean, at a very simple level, it comes in the form of rocks as well. So it can go through typical mining extraction processes. One of the, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts about this. One of the emerging technologies for lithium is to do direct lithium extraction. So especially for the brines, you don't have to evaporate all that water, which takes, again, a lot of energy or a lot of time. And so you can just get the lithium out and let the rest of the brine flow through.
Cool. Thank you. Liliane?
Yeah, great. So my angle, I think, on lithium is a quite strong view, because actually lithium was one of the motivations for me to even do my PhD and to found the company, because it was daily practice over the last years and decades to not recycle lithium, because actually its raw material price hasn't been super high. If you throw batteries in a smelter, lithium is not recoverable. And what really annoyed me over the last years is the fact that there were many corporates claiming to recycle lithium by enriching it into a so-called mineral phase, right? So they said okay, we are not recovering lithium as salt, but as some sort of rock. And this we can use in street construction, so we recycle it. And this is actually, I think, not the way to go, even though we can ramp up mining capacities, which we should, because we're still in a ramp-up phase for lithium-ion battery put on market. We should still think more resource efficient on lithium and find the right methods to recycle it. Nice side effect is, of course, that the raw material prices have been increasing over the last years. of course, a bit volatile. We all know that, but still, it's therefore more important to have methods in place to extract lithium environmentally friendly and also economically. And therefore, I think especially the topics of direct lithium extraction is super interesting. And what we focused on with our process is to recycle lithium completely different than it was done over the last years then, as of course there were developments. But they said, okay, we are still going for copper, going for nickel first, and then, yeah, with the residual solution, we try to get a bit of lithium back. But that's actually very chemical intense and expensive. And you have actually like a lot of stuff you need to treat afterwards. And so what we are doing is we moved the lithium recycling in a battery recycling value chain to the beginning of the hydrometallurgical process. So our approach is lithium first, basically, and this enables us to get back lithium just with water, and therefore we are quite similar to the brines, just with higher concentrations of lithium. So we have a double win and are able to extract the greenest lithium in the world with our process. And there, of course, those innovative technologies which you just described are super helpful because they even increase the lithium recycling efficiencies and also, you know, the energy consumptions and so on. So there's like a lot of progress happening, and I'm really following this quite closely. And yeah, we are, of course, also doing some of that in our process. Yep.
Super cool. Thanks, Lilian. Eric, how do you see the...
Expanding on the batteries, in fact, I like also the graphite that you mentioned. It's, as you know, it's used in battery anodes, and it's a low cost and energy density, so it has a lot of qualities. And because our topic also today is how to fill the critical gap, the critical minerals gap, I have in mind that graphite had some ban exports in 2023 by China, and the way we can react as as an economy is, and we must react, is very important. And so very rapidly, in fact, the US developed in their Defense Production Act, has expanded the list of items covered by this Defense Production Act to graphite, which enabled, in fact, the US government to invest in Graphite One 38 million grant for the US Defense Department to accelerate development and the mining in Alaska for this company. So you see, that's exactly the type of measures we want to be able to see in Europe, and with the Critical Raw Material Act that has just been put in place. A lot is still to be operationalized, but having the ability to react rapidly and foster the extraction domestically of minerals is key also.
Cool. You wanted to react? Yes?
I couldn't agree more, because actually graphite is also one of the topics which matter a lot to us. And what we've seen over mining is also that a substitution with synthetic graphite is happening to mitigate the whole supply chain risks from natural graphite. However, like actually the energy you need to bring graphite flakes into battery usable raw materials is way higher than for natural graphite. And therefore, it's actually a better way to recycle graphite in a way that you don't destroy those properties.
Right.
And that's what we are doing, because this directly helps to integrate graphite back into technological applications. But once you destroy the morphology, you have to pay the price, and I mean literally the price for the energy of transitioning it to battery materials again.
Right.
And we can be very creative by doing exploiting domestically, in fact, lithium. And there's a German company, German-Australian company, in fact, Vulcan Energy Resources, with combining, in fact, the extraction of lithium and geothermal, so they derive the energy necessary for their process from the geothermal energy. So we can be very creative and innovative also in Europe. So that's important for us to say.
Yeah, well, the new types of brine, like geothermal brine, and it's also interesting. When I saw also, there's also like a lot of oil and gas companies investing in extracting lithium from former oil and gas produced waters as well. So there's a lot of these unconventional resources. You wanted to complement, Julia?
I just wanted to add a few numbers because I think it helps people put things in perspective. And so for copper, going back to it, in an electric vehicle, you need about 2.5 times more in an electric vehicle than in an internal combustion engine. For lithium, I think, and that's, so in an electric vehicle, you need about 53 or 55 kilos of copper. Lithium is 10 kilos, more or less, and graphite is like 65 kilos of it.
Yeah,
So it's really large amounts, and right now we only mine 1 million metric tons of it, but we need to increase that by 550%. It's just to put things in perspective.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. What about nickel? Anyone wants to take nickel?
So yeah, again, bad news. We don't have nickel in Europe, neither in the US, really. So we again rely on imports. However, nickel is put into batteries more and more. So in order to mitigate the supply chain risks for cobalt, there's even put more nickel in batteries. So this brings our supply chain risk into a more dramatical state. And therefore, the urgency is also to recycle nickel because we've seen, like over the last years, that the supply chains for nickel weren't as stable as we thought them to be neither. So this was like a very sad experience because nickel is also coming from Russia, for example, and therefore, like suddenly we faced also nickel supply chain challenges. And therefore, it's also important to recycle nickel, and here the goal is definitely at very high recycling rates to be able to, don't ignore any of the nickel. And so I think sometimes it seems a bit hopeless if we say, oh, we don't have any raw materials here, no mines. But then on the other hand side, we have a very mature market in terms of lithium-ion battery penetration and use, and therefore urban mining can be a key to just mitigate those supply chain risks. And therefore, yeah, we have to talk about lithium, yeah, we have to talk about graphite, but we shouldn't forget about nickel neither.
Yeah. Maybe a question like to wrap up the conversation on batteries for the three of you. Battery chemistry is not like an invariance. There's talks about, for instance, sodium-ion batteries. There's the LFP batteries is also like growing a lot and so on. So and even on the graphite side, like there's like companies investing in like silicon anodes or even like silicon-coated carbon materials. So how do you see, both as an investor and also as a founder having to set up a recycling facility, how do you see like the future supply of batteries and materials and the evolution of chemistries, like, and how does that play into your investment decisions, basically?
You're absolutely right. So you mentioned LFPs, and LFP batteries, for example, don't use any nickel or much nickel at all. So depending on how, like, which battery chemistries are going to be scaling up massively, some of those critical mineral gaps might evolve. Like the numbers that we've been giving you today, they might change quite dramatically, and so it makes the supply chain in the long run quite complicated, because we're taking a couple, like 1 to 2 decades to plan mines. It's very expensive, in the billions of dollars. So investors into mining really need to understand that that the demand is going to be there. So we definitely make a difference as investors into the metals that are almost purely for the energy transition, where you have additional risks because of new technologies and new chemistries that will be uptaken, versus other metals like copper, which is used across everything, and the demand is going to keep rising no matter what.
Cool. I don't know if you want to react, otherwise...
We see, in fact, a lot of new battery chemistries emerging, such as the one that use sodium instead of lithium, so you mentioned it, or even reduce the need for lithium or cobalt. There's one company, Denmark-based, Topsoe, who in fact is requiring half as much lithium, no rare earth element and no cobalt. So there are companies, in fact, even in Europe, that are working and struggling for that. The problem will be, Benjamin, as you know, the scaling up for that. And we need a market, a huge market, because obviously the competition for batteries is already dominated by some players, and these are not European, not even. So that's the difficulty. So we have to think several steps ahead and make sure that whatever chemistry we put in place, this will have, in fact, a commercial strategic advantage that will make it scalable at large scale.
Yeah, great.
Just one short comment, because yeah, as recyclers, we are of course quite aware of the market in the future, and we see that there is application for several new battery chemistries. Yeah, depending on how much energy is needed. Just to give you an example, so we are electrifying our whole mobility. So it's not only about EVs, about cars, but we are also talking about aviation, for example. And for high performance applications, there will be probably lithium inside in the batteries also in the next decades. However, for stationary storage at home, for example, you can also think about sodium-ion batteries. And also for EVs, I think there are already a few Chinese companies going into that market. However, there are quite interesting like battery chemistries also coming in the market with minimizing lithium shares, but others completely have a different angle and maximizing lithium in terms of lithium metal anodes. Yeah. Also super interesting. So I did that in my PhD actually. So that's working quite well, good recyclable. And this is, I think, a very important topic to keep in mind. Of course, we are diversifying the whole battery chemistries. But at the same time, we always have to maybe rethink, is the recyclability working, not just for recycling, but for securing our supply chains. And therefore, especially for lithium iron phosphate, for example, you already touched on that. Exactly, there is no nickel inside, no cobalt, but still lithium, which is good news. So we can still keep lithium in the loop with that. And especially for those low value batteries from a monetary value, there are recycling fees paid because, of course, recycling has to do some of work. And that's why for us as well, those lithium phosphate batteries are very interesting to recycle, and they don't pose super challenges to be recyclable. So that's, I think, also a good trend.
Yeah, that's a great point. What are some of the big macro trends that some of you are looking at that could really significantly influence either the demand or ability to bridge the supply? And I'm thinking mega trends like on the geopolitical or policy and regulation side. It can be emerging technologies, it can be the pace of electrification, it can be a lot of things. But what are you keeping your eye on?
Well, in fact, when it comes to geopolitics, we see that there are several blocks, in fact, that were, and the starting line was not the same. And China started 20, 30 years ago, and they chose, in fact, a planification route. And as you know, they made a plan which is called Made in China 2025. That was, in fact, to paving the way for China to become a leader in a low-carbon industry, in digital, and AI. And all of them, in fact, require the supply of critical minerals. So for this economy, obviously, it was a long shot, and they started long ago, and they have a base of minerals domestically. So that's obviously very different. The US reacted, in fact, very fast in the last years. Mostly they reacted by using incentivization, as you see with the the IRA, in fact, Inflation Reduction Act. That was a choice that was made, and in fact, it's subsidizing a lot. For instance, the battery industry that we are talking about. EU chose a different route, more regulated, and you saw the Net Zero Act, the Clean Raw Material Act, which is now being operationalized, and it's a lot about regulation, and we'll see how it is in fact put in place and how fast it will be. So that's in fact, and then there is the coordination between the US and Europe and some other geographies that will be of paramount importance. So geopolitics is at the heart of what we have to do in order to make sure that there is no lack of critical minerals for any industry or any geography that is needing it.
Yeah, great points. Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in?
Just echoing what you're saying, I guess governments and like the EU are concerned about getting access to those materials. So you mentioned the Raw Materials Act, where I think the goal is to have like a certain amount, like the EU bloc must be mining itself about 10% of the needs for the EU, processing 40% and recycling at least 25%. And like you said, in the US, we have the IRA, which is taking a slightly different approach where they're incentivizing the growth of the demand, but they're also putting some minimum requirements on the amount of materials, for example, in cars by value, not by tonnage, that need to be either from the US or from countries where the US has, with which the US has free trade agreements. And that's evolving pretty fast. Today in 2024, it's 50% of a battery, of the metals in a battery need to come from the US or allies. And then by 2027, that's 80%. So we see that at the government phase, but we also see companies directly making lots of deals of supply agreement and
securing offtakes.
Securing their offtakes,
Cool. So, super interesting. We're going to move soon to a question from the audience. So if you haven't, please, you can go on Slido and submit your questions. I'd like maybe ask you, Liliane, about your experience of like starting a company in that space and like the founder journey, because it's an impressive industry, very capex intensive, can be conservative. So what's been your journey so far in securing that funding, building partnerships, and so on?
Yeah, that's actually exactly the right aspect. It's capex intense, and actually, my professor once told me there will be never a startup coming from my institute, because he thought like he was like capable of supporting that. But actually, when we had the idea to found a company, we talked to a dear friend of ours who is a founder as well and had a successful exit, and he introduced us into the deep tech space. For us, a completely new world. Was really cool to directly, as young startup with actually a bit older ideas already, so they were quite mature over the PhD, but a fresh founded company. We just met the right people at the right time. Actually, really cool VCs who were helping us in our seed stage to build the business to a pilot line and like already thinking into the future. So such funds like V-Squared Ventures, Speed Invest, and World Fund, and 10x Founders, they came very early and supported us not only with network, but with the right vision and the understanding of the market and the technology. Because basically, as hardware, deep tech startup, your business looks a bit different than in terms of a software model, right? Because we have to invest first, and then the revenues are coming as we produce, and then skyrocketing, right? And this is actually quite interesting as we grow now. We see that we are currently in our Series A, so we are about to close it, have already signed a term sheet, so I think we're on a quite good track. Thank you. So it's quite good dynamics, but we also see that there are not a lot of VCs in Europe who really understand hardware deep tech space so closely. Of course, they are aware of that, and they need to also change probably their methods to make also investments into hardware, because they also understand that the climate crisis cannot only be tackled by software, but we also need hardware, we need innovative solutions, and that's probably then the case for us. And so I think we are not in a like bad situation. In contrast, we can have good experiences, but we also see that there are not a lot of VCs who understand metallurgy, who understand deep tech and hardware. And I think also for Europe now it's time to also support such ventures, because we see that from the IRA in the US, they have seen what they can do with, supporting innovative ideas. And now this is also something which needs to come from Europe. In Germany, there's about to launch actually a critical raw material fund with 1 billion, and they want to do precisely that. And so I think we all have to learn still, but I cannot complain.
Thanks. Congrats. I'm looking at the question from the audience. So actually, there's one type of mineral we haven't talked about that was mentioned in the questions, rare earth elements for permanent magnets, in particular in wind turbines, electric motors. Anyone wants to take the rare earth and talk about like the market, the gap, and technologies?
I honestly don't know much about rare earths, but the most important rare earth material is neodymium. One for which we expect a gap in supply. I think it's an area where a lot of companies are innovating to get rid of the rare earths. So that's a major trend that we see, a little bit like cobalt, which poses some environmental and social problems. When rare earths are difficult to get access to, people are trying to engineering them out. A quick take.
For rare earths, we need innovation, obviously. That is the case because they will be missing, in fact, whatever geopolitics is at place, whatever cooperation. And there are, in fact, some very interesting initiative. For instance, a car automotive manufacturer like Tesla is trying to transition EV motors to new ones that would, in fact, require fewer or even no rare earth magnets. So that is encouraging. We should, in fact, invest a lot more in innovation because that will be one of the key bottlenecks. In fact, none of our companies will be successful if we don't solve each and any of these problems.
Yeah, and maybe transitioning to my next question, makes me think about the venture backability of companies, because in particular, rare earth, the market is like not that huge today for rare earth. It's about like 10 billion. And if you look at different steps like extraction, separation, and so on, the question is like how much also value can you capture as a company? But basically, it brings me to how do you, as investors, Eric and Julia, like how do you evaluate the venture backability of a startup in the critical mineral space, given that it's really a non-trivial industry to build in?
Yeah, so of course we're looking for exactly the same things. We're evaluating the teams, we're evaluating the technology and its soundness, the revenue model, the IP strengths. What am I missing? The exit valuations. We're doing all of that work the same for mining, for companies in the mining space as we would be in any other space. But for me, it really comes down to one thing, and it's experience on the team. I think if you have not been boots on the ground in the industry, it's hard to realize the sheer scale of those operations. We've already said that it takes decades to find mines, decades to start mining them. Once there is a plan, it takes billions of dollars to get them started. But also, you need to operate them for something like 20, 30 years. And so people are optimizing for a feedstock. You're just literally digging the earth out. It's not the same everywhere over 30 years. So you're trying to optimize your processes so that you can get as much of the metals out for as cost efficiently as possible. And so in that context, it's really hard for the people making those process decisions to trust startups to take a role. Like, are they even going to be up in 5 years, right? Up and running. So things like that. And there's also a lot of technologies that are adding to existing mines, but you're facing a lot of legacy systems that are really hard to integrate with. So, I'm literally looking for people on the team from the startups that are experienced and that understand the complexities of this industry.
Great. Thanks, Julia. Eric?
And for us, and to answer your question, so how do we assess the VC backability? Number one, there's one criteria, and you know that it's for any of our companies. They need to have a huge impact on the GHG emission. And so we need to believe that any of our company will reach at scale 0.5 gigaton equivalent CO2 per year in 2050. So that's the number one. So it needs to be big. And the second criteria, obviously, when I say that, is what is the potential disruptive model that they have? And do we believe it? I just said during our talk on the battery a few minutes ago, we see a lot of innovative technologies, but they are already well-established players. How likely is it that these technologies will be disrupting the existing markets? That's very important because we want innovation, but innovation that can be scaled. And that's the key criteria in order to have an impact.
Great. Thanks, Eric. And we have time for a very last quick question. There's a question about talent and the talent pipeline in the sector, and it's something I'm really interested in because as a Climate Tech Venture Studio, we work with talented people to build new companies in that space and others. So the question is, what does the talent pipeline look in the critical mineral space today when you want to hire engineers and so on, and what drives them? Is it the innovation? Is it the geopolitical angle? Is it the sustainability? Is it the three of them? Like maybe Liliane, particularly for you in terms of hiring and talent.
Yeah, for us, most applications come actually from really ambitious and hungry, quite young researchers. So let's say mostly coming from their PhDs and feeling like, okay, I've researched, but I want to have an impact. And with our mission, to industrialize and to bring our technology to the world, they have a feeling that their experience really has meaning and impact, and therefore I think those are most talents which are applying for us. In our team, we are 54 people now. We have a funny age average, so we have a lot of people below 40, and then again plus 55, because we have several seniors in the team who have built up like big chemical plants all over the world, and they are like saying, we want to come to you because we want to do one last big thing and do something good, and therefore they just support us, and this is beautiful because we sometimes say we are more generation company because it's the young hungry engineers and the seniors who have like the experience on their shoulders, and this is really cool synergy.
Combining the energy of the fresh graduates with the experience of the senior metallurgist. I love that.
Exactly.
Well, that's a great way to conclude. Thank you a lot, the three of you, for your time today. Thanks, everyone. Time today, and let's bridge this supply gap now.
Thank you.
Go.
Thank you, everyone.